Welcome to Frontline Dispatches on Organizing Upgrade. We're a show dedicated to spotlighting the most urgent left organizing and activism happening around the country and beyond for racial and economic justice and much more. You can see us and tune in for future episodes of Frontline Dispatches every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's 6 p.m. Central and 4 p.m. Pacific. My name is Gerald Lenoir, and I will be your host today. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please leave your comments and questions in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring those as the show goes on. And if you haven't yet, give Organizing Upgrade a like and subscribe to this channel. And finally, to stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade, you can sign up at our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, and articles about left strategy and for organizers. So let's get it on. Today, I am very happy to have as guests Maria Rodriguez, who is the Executive Director of FLIC, the Florida Immigrant Rights Coalition, and Dwight Bullard, the Political Director of New Florida Majority. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for joining us. So let's get right into it, you all. I appreciate the work that you all are doing in Florida. And before we get too deep into it, can you talk to us about what your organizations are doing on the ground? Who are the folks you're organizing, and what your outlook on the 2020 elections are? Maria, you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So good to be able to connect with organizers and have some space to reflect on our practice. Well, I'd like to share a little bit at two levels. One is the level of the Florida Immigrant Coalition and FLIC Votes, which is a whole ecology of about 60 organizations in about 20 counties, from youth to farm workers to women to lawyers to unions to advocates coming together so that people can live, love, and labor without fear. But also, we are part of the co-founders of Florida for All, which Senator Bullard will also, I'm sure, share about, which is essentially we're building a united front so that we can then build a broad front, and so that the social movements have an electoral expression. And we're working with the Black and brown voters of the state of Florida, whether they be immigrants or not immigrants, Latino, Cuban, Puerto Rican, Haitian. And so we're shaping a new electorate that reflects more closely the population of Florida, the diversity in Florida, and making sure it's an active and conscious electorate. So is that a good introduction? Is that a good appetizer?
That is a good appetizer. Definitely. Dwight, it's your turn for an appetizer.
Oh, well, I mean, she put the amuse-bouche appetizer out there already, so that's we appreciate that, Maria. So, New Florida Majority is a C4 electoral-based voting rights civic engagement organization that has traditionally worked in historically marginalized communities here in Florida. What that generally equates to are Black, brown, AAPI, kind of you name it, people who've been, traditionally left in the margins, those who are houseless or transitioning, undocumented folks, LGBTQIA, you name it. We like to try and be a political home for all those folks. But we are super duper excited about what Maria alluded to, which is the formation of Florida for All, which is has been for us a relatively long-term project in bringing organizations around the state of Florida together to kind of fight on all the fronts. What we realized years ago was that we were all basically trying to do the same work, but oftentimes, and too oftentimes, talking to the same people, even though we all have our very specific niche in terms of communities that tend to be attracted to the work that we're doing. So through scientific method, through what we understand voter outreach and civic engagement to be, we realized that if we operationalized all those different lanes that we're occupying, that we could cover a lot more bases. And so You take the 5 major counties that New Florida Majority works in. Maria talked about the 20 counties that Flick is working in. You take the 5 additional partners that we have, and what we find ourselves doing is talking to a significant chunk of Black and Latinx voters throughout the state of Florida, and that is a significant number. We're excited to talk about that.
We're very excited to hear about it. If you could talk a little bit more about the strategic alliance that you've been able to build, kind of what is the basis of the alliance? What's the strategic narrative that drives your work, and how the alliance functions, and what you're learning from this alliance building initiative?
Do you want me to
go for it?
To take it? Oh yeah. So the way I see it is like it's really an organic and natural process of building that ecology, that archipelago, that united front, that Gerald, that icon of a lot of the little fishes that become the big fish and then eats the typical organizer piece. So I think we initially came together to build sustainability and impact. So from our orientation, so first of all, to give you a little bit of historical context, Flick and Miami Workers Center felt like it was time for us to really build that electoral machine, and that's how NFM came to be the New Florida Majority. And as we've grown that process, we then brought in other partners and new partners. And initially it was really as EDs, and I know this is really a conversation in many ways for organizers and movement builders, we're really addressing the fact that we often are isolated, and we need to, and while we were winning, we might have been winning, and we were winning some important policy campaigns, wage theft, access to college, defeating the Corrections Corporation of America, et cetera, we were still losing ground, losing political ground. And so our process is that we wanted to change policy. And in order to change policy, we needed to change politics. And that's how we elevated our work to become more focused on the electoral consequences. And that's when Flick Votes emerges as well in 2016 under the Trump administration. But then we also now are seeing that we have to address culture, because it's not about the candidates, it's not about the elected, it's about the electorate, it's about the voters. And until we really do that communications, that consciousness, that paradigm shifting, that ideology, and that shared ideology that has communications expression, we're not going to be able to make the political shifts. And so this formation has helped us move from being defensive, reactive, to having enough courage and to build the machine to be a more proactive, longer term, and to shift us from opposition to proposition, from defense to that governance orientation. And we talk about non-patriarchal governing power. And so there's 3 buckets of work that have been evolving. One is breaking the back of Jim Crow, and that's become Freedom for Florida. The other is expanding democracy, and the third is building community wealth. And so with that, I'll pass it on to the Senator.
Senator, what's your take on the alliance?
I mean, how do I follow that up, Gerald, is really the essential question. What I'll touch on is just simply the notion of the ladder of engagement. Traditionally, we look at the ladder of engagement in terms of kind of just like building the great organizer. It's kind of being the apex of what that ladder of engagement looks like. Through this formation, we're now taking that kind of traditional understanding of the ladder of engagement and moving people from kind of this base understanding of what political engagement looks like, whether that is them registering to vote or them coming to an action, and moving them all the way through to the potential of helping to develop policy, helping to run for office themselves. And what we're excited to see is kind of when that spark, that imagination sparks in somebody who's been on the outskirts of politics for, most of their life. And now they're gathering other people and saying, we're going to collectively go into spaces like Tallahassee or going to Washington, D.C. and having these critical conversations with these folks about why or what the impacts of their policy or the lack of policy looks like and feels like for them directly. We always talk about the notion of directly impacted individuals kind of being the best storytellers or the best people to carry their story. To see that manifest itself and duplicate itself over and over and over again is one of the great joys of the formation that I've seen over my involvement with it over the last couple of years.
Yeah. So Maria, you mentioned the fact that you're organizing Black and brown folks, and I know that Florida has a very unique demographic, and I know that complicates the organizing and the politics of Florida. So can you all talk about what that looks like and how you're addressing the very diverse populations that you're organizing?
Yes. As the OG Anthony Thigpen says, demography is not destiny. We have to really work the consciousness and the ideology and the politics of communities and build that depth of leadership that Dwight was just talking about. And so the way that we've structured this cycle collectively is that we obviously have the phones, the text, and now we've introduced the doors in the mail. But we've learned cycle after cycle that we have to build the movement orientation of the election. And that's being grounded in constituency base. So we have 5 different constituency based groups that are meeting, that are building coalitions and platforms, messages and messengers. And those constituency groups are Latino, are Black, our youth, our faith, and our women. And so each of them have a particular experience, a particular message, particular cultural icons, and platforms, medias, as I mentioned. And so we are digging a little bit deeper and building that reach into these counties so that it's not just one iHeart radio buy across the state or one mailer across the state. And so there's a real capacity question around, we're not Cambridge Analytica where we have 5,000 data points on each voter, but we can be very receptive and connected to communities in a way that we are being relevant, that our messages and our messengers are so relevant because they are from community. And so for the Latinx, for example, we've created different audiences and different capacities for Puerto Rican, for Cuban, for Pan American, and within Pan Americans, there's Venezuelan, there's Colombian, there's Mexican. So each of them gets engaged in different geographies and different platforms and media with different messages. Dwight,
what's your take on the demographics and what that does for your strategies and tactics?
So I would piggyback off of what Maria was sharing. And it made me think about the notion of soup, right? We always talk about how it's warm, it's comforting, it's something that is endearing to most communities. And each community has its own take on that. So whether it is gumbo, whether it is jumu, whether it is sancocho, everyone kind of has that notion. So we take that theory and we take the letters SOUP and we create something like the School of Unity and Power, right? Something that we understand that through struggle, through continued struggle, through organized struggle, communities, oftentimes historically marginalized, have used something, some linchpin, some cornerstone that helps them to oftentimes organize themselves in times of moments of great crisis. And so, we come to that as this kind of merry band of folks from all different walks of life, but oftentimes coming from that same historical trajectory, coming from the organizing movements of the 1950s and 60s, coming from the labor movements, coming from the farm worker movements of Cesar Chavez and the like, to really think about how do we take kind of important grassroots strategies and do a deeper dive into these communities. Oftentimes, what we've seen in electoral politics is a reliance on tactics that are oftentimes, unfortunately, rooted in white supremacy. So how do we turn that on its head? How do we say to folks that you are the important factor in this? It is not the cult of personality. It is not some individual knocking on your door every 2 years or 4 years saying, come vote for me, but more of a 365 discussion on how to move the needle around who pulls the levers of power and how power shows up in community.
So Dwight, Maria just mentioned that not being Cambridge Analytics, but I'm sure you're using analytics. So talk a little bit about your game on the internet and in social media and the like.
Well, I guess I'll start first with that one. And so when we think about communities, there are various ways in which communities engage. So, you have communities that are organizing on WhatsApp. You have communities that are setting up Facebook groups. You have communities that are organizing themselves on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and the like. And so it's not a question of using, as Maria pointed out, these kind of egregious and over-the-top data points to try and quote unquote understand how people are thinking, but more so figure out where people are. And then what is the appropriate messaging? Who are the best validators to help develop the kind of conversation and talking points in those spaces where people are showing up. So if people are on, if you have Latinx communities organizing on WhatsApp, in the Venezuelan community, you don't want to have somebody on there who's, who may be from Honduras or Colombia, because the experience is different. And more importantly, it's a camaraderie among folks. So it's now organizing that organizer who comes from a Venezuelan background, who understands the community better, to now engage their own folks, but understanding that is a power dynamic in helping communities to get themselves out of whatever condition they may find themselves in.
I'm going to ask our audience to drop their questions in the chat box if you have any questions. Maria, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say it feels paradoxic, because on one level we want to name and validate the differences, as Dwight was saying, asopao and sancocho or whatever. But at the same time, we're also building unity. So it's an interesting tension there between recognizing the differences between the communities and the different experiences we have, but really shifting the conversation to who the real enemy is and what really and the commonalities that we hold.
Yeah.
And in terms of, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say in terms of we had an interesting experience in the last 48 hours. So we had the deadline for the voter registration, and of course the system malfunctioned. So 3 or 4 hours on the last day. We were registering like 219 people per hour on the last day. Us alone, not to mention across the 7 organizations, which I want to make sure to name them before we end, because Dwight and I have the privilege of being conversing today, but there's so many other amazing leaders and a lot of Black women and women of color who are holding and leading this space as well. I want to make sure we recognize that. But in the last 48 hours, so we had to file a lawsuit, get a temporary restraining order, attempt to get one, etc. And it turned out, and so we broke the internet, because we were like pushing voter registration in the context of a state that, as everybody knows, has a pattern and a practice, policy and practice of voter suppression. So it turned out Ariana Grande had tweeted on that day. She has like 77 million followers, and the Department of State saying they were getting 1.1 million clicks per hour on voter registration. So that's kind of the scale that we've never seen before, that level of scale and that reach with new technologies that we're exploring with. and the power of influencers. And we're leveraging that. Some influencers are just people like us that are good organizers, and other influencers are makeup artists, or, they're not all, or gardeners and chefs. They're not all superstars, but very important because they have followers in the community.
Yeah, by every means necessary. I hear you. So I just want to turn to the victory in the passing of Amendment 4 in the 2018 election, where 1.4 million returning citizens from prison ostensibly got the right to vote. Can you talk about that victory and kind of the current state of it, given what the state legislature has done to counteract it? Dwight, you want to go?
Sure thing. So it's grassroots organizing at its finest. In order to pass a ballot initiative here in the state of Florida, and as Maria's pointed out, parcel in practice with a lot of voter suppression and tactics. In order to pass a citizen-run ballot initiative, you need 800,000 signatures, verified signatures from 9 different congressional districts, just in order to get that on the ballot, not to mention all the money that you need to raise in order to run an effective campaign to get that passed. That being said, we were able to net over 1.2 million verified signatures. And in the state of Florida, you are required to get a 60% vote, pass a 60% voter threshold. We were able to get over 65% of Floridians to vote in favor of Amendment 4, which, as you pointed out, Gerald, would have ultimately given the right to vote back to a number of folks who ultimately shouldn't have lost it to begin with. But the state of Florida had a very problematic stipulation in this Constitution that had been there for 150 years that said that anyone who had committed a felony would lose their right to vote in perpetuity or for the rest of their lives. So in essence, that's what we were able to extract. And I'd be remiss if I did not shout out and recognize Desmond Meade, who was the brainchild and the person who spearheaded and got us all really kind of on the same page about getting this thing done here in the state of Florida, and is deserving of all the credit for that he's been receiving in terms of helping to do that, because in essence, what that represented was the greatest expansion of voting rights since the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Just statistically speaking, 1 out of every 4 disenfranchised returning citizens up until that point lived in the state of Florida. So 25% of all people who were seeking reenfranchisement, who were former felons, were Floridians. And it's one of I think the things that we walk around as a badge of honor, all of us are saying we got done. But I'll let Maria talk about why our state legislature is so problematic and what they've been doing to undermine it.
Well, I wanted to just take a moment as we think about why the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition is so important and Desmond's leadership is so important, is because oftentimes we're in policy battles or legislative battles, but this really has felt since whenever we started, 16, 17, or way before, actually. I remember having Desmond at one of our FLIC congresses, but it's not a legislative campaign, it's a liberation movement. And the experience of the people who have had the experience of being survivors of the criminal injustice system to connect with each other and to build that power, and for that to be, the Second Chances campaign and the Restoration campaign has been just so powerful. And last week, Desmond went to the cabinet to ask for a pardon, and he went with his deputy, Neil, who's been working side by side with him. And Neil got the pardon, and Desmond's pardon was postponed. So it really is. You feel like it is. It's part of the history of our state and of our country. And Desmond's also been very clear about how we need to be connected between the folks who are survivors of the criminal justice system, injustice system, as I mentioned, and folks who are survivors of the broken immigration system. And we've been really working together, at least in vision, around the full citizenship and what it means to belong and to be recognized. So I just want to say that. And so the fines and the fees and the difficulty on one level, part of the amendment included full compliance with their, what is it? Is it called sentence, Dwight? I forget. There's a very important technical term there. And the fines and fees, how much of that is considered? And the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition has gone county by county to try to negotiate and settle that. And at the 10th or 11th hour, they did get some money to help pay for fines and fees on the mass level. And we're registering the hell out of it. I know FRC had like 200 people out in the field getting people their chance and their rights restored. And it's just, I know we Flick did about 1 million phone calls since March. And some of the stories on the phone is just so beautiful. It's really very liberating and empowering and also heartbreaking at times. So, yeah.
The struggle continues. I think that's all the time we have. Maria, thank you so much. Dwight, thank you.
Well, if Jared, we can shout out our other partners in crime, as Maria
Absolutely,
pointed out.
shout them out.
Yeah, let's do that.
Shout them out.
So we have obviously New Florida Majority and Flick Votes, Organized Florida, Dream Defenders, Central Florida Jobs with Justice, Faith in Action, and our labor union SCIU. And it's growing. We have some local theories of change tables that are bringing in more people, and Florida for All is becoming a force for our people so that we can get governing power in the state of Florida and win the quality of life that we deserve and the dignity that we deserve.
Yeah, I want to paraphrase and quote Andre 3000, Gerald, and say that the South has something to say. And so look out for Florida in the future.
The South definitely has something to say. I've been to Florida many times and had the privilege of working with both of you. Good luck in your campaigns, and let's see if we can turn Florida into the U.S. for all.
Sí se puede, sí se puede. We no capab.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. To our audience, if you enjoyed this video, stay up to speed with us and come out to organizingupgrade.com. Sign up at our website to hear about our events. Thank you again, and thank you all who joined us today, and see you next week.
Thank you.
All right.